Well, the 51st Super Bowl was certainly a game of epic proportions. The winners returned to their hometown as heroes. The New England Patriots pulled off a historic win on Sunday, the first Super Bowl ever to go overtime. We talk with sports agents, players, and parents about another side of the big game, the challenge of a concussion-prone risk. I'm Lorna Duick, and you're watching Context.
But what I think about quite a bit is the millions of kids playing these sports every single day.
Former and pro football players work with the Concussion Legacy Foundation to prevent concussions on the field.
At the end of the day, it's just like any other job when we play football professionally, and workers' health is number one.
And caring for ourselves is just as important as playing the game.
Unfortunately, I was kind of attacked by a goalie.
Former hockey player Danielle Coldwell speaks about her hockey-ending concussions in the rough and tumble world of girls hockey. We'll also have a local coach talk about that. Our Sheldon Neal went to Boston to find out what a football alumni team thinks of the big game now. Take a look.
Well, Tim, let's start here. You're no stranger to the reality of concussions, head trauma. Share a little bit of your story with us.
Yeah, so played tons of sports growing up, typical Canadian kid, football, hockey, rugby, all sports where you do see a number of head injuries, and played football in college here at Harvard in Boston, and 10 years in the CFL. So certainly it's been an unfortunate reality in my life, but I'm not sure we learned or understood as much about it back then as we do now. Especially in the last 5 years.
In reading your story, you voiced in some of the research that it's about research that pinpoints who's at risks, adults, youth, and trying to get involved early in the process before trauma gets into something much worse. But how does that practically how is that practically carried out? Because it's easier just to say, but what does that really look like in a step-by-step form?
When you're talking about concussions and head injuries, there's really two different subjects that you're talking about. There's acute concussions, which receive a lot of attention, but then there's also the cumulative damage that happens over time, and are characterized really by the number of times that you get hit in the head during the course of your career is associated with your risk profile, roughly, from what we think we understand. But one of the things that we've seen anecdotally is kids who don't participate in contact sports until the age of 14 tend to do much, much better. And then I think when you look at football, which is a sport that's near and dear to all of us up here on the panel, I think we really want to look at modifying the game for the younger kids.
And I want to come back to you, Brian. You're connected with concussions. You have a history with that. Tell me a little bit about your story as well.
Yes, I mean, similar to Tim, kind of grew up multi-sport, and then you develop this passion for football. And for me, my body type, big kid, not as athletic as all the other kids on the block, being a lineman was perfect. And Tim kind of was alluding to, it's the linemen that are subject to that second kind of, issue of that repetitive damage to the brain. I can remember those 100 Oklahoma drills in a grade school, practice where I'm bashing my head against, other kids just to make some coach feel like he's playing Madden better. You know what I mean? And to grow from that, then I was really lucky to played football at Stanford, and I've played 6 years in the CFL.
Give us a sense of what your recovery and what recovery looks like after a head trauma, after concussion, because some people may not really understand what that's like. Give us a picture of what it was like.
So the funny thing, we're kind of alluding, do we even have a chance to recover, right? At the end of the day, especially as a pro, you're playing next weekend. And a lot of stuff that comes out, we should be taking more time. Even the idea of recovery and what that means, the crazy part, I think that's still being explored. So for myself, I would just judge it as do I feel good? And I think, add a little peer pressure by teammates, and that's definitely not the best way to go about it.
discussions being covered more and more in media. Off camera for this interview, we're talking about the kind of the grassroots push. People are getting more engaged with head injuries in sports, the links to the dangers with that. Now that we're at this kind of bridge, what does the way forward look like? Where do we go from here?
So this issue gets a lot of attention at the pro level, but with the work that we're all doing with the Concussion Legacy Foundation, a real focus actually with the pediatric population, and I think that's where the bigger problem is. I mean, there's a limited number of guys who end up playing pro football, and it's not that they're not important, and it's not that their long-term health is not important. But what I think about quite a bit is the millions of kids playing these sports every single day. And I think, what we would like to see, and, I'll speak for myself, and these guys can chime in with their thoughts on it, but sport for me was so important to my own personal development. And I learned lessons on football fields and hockey rinks that you just can't teach in a classroom. And they were so foundational to who I am today. So I think what we'd like to see is, how do we get sports where kids are able to enjoy that personal development while still being safe and not suffering any of the long-term problems that we've seen.
Andrew, quick question to you. You lead, I want to make sure I get this right, you lead the Brains and Brawn camp that teaches kids about the dangers of concussions and what to do if you have one. Hey, I was very active in sports. I mean, to those watching, I may not have the same physical appearance as these guys. I was more of a baller, but I say when you're a child, you watch what they do on the screen and you want to do it as well. How do we protect kids as athletes? How do you protect kids from what they see in terms of, hey, we want to make sure they're being engaged in sport in the right way and something that's safe? How do we paint that picture for them? Because it's monkey see, monkey do a lot of times for them.
Absolutely. As a kid, you want to emulate what you see on TV, right? I think it's important that they have the knowledge to understand how to approach doing that, right? The Brain and Brawn camp is essentially an on-field application of what we teach in class, so to speak, about concussions and safer play. So we're actually giving these kids the opportunity to physically emulate what we've taught to them. And the more kids that we can reach with that, I think the safer the sport will become. Tackling properly, keeping your head out of it. And if they get a chance to apply that on the field, they can use that to emulate how the pros play, so to speak. One big thing that's come from it is the parents that have actually sat in on the camps, and they could take it away with them. And they could essentially reinforce that whole safe play mentality until it's ubiquitous kind of across youth organized sports.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Former Ottawa Rough Rider Jerry Organ speaks to us about being with a teammate day by day as a head injury took his friend's life. Throwing in the towel, why former NFL star Tyler Varga walked away from his field of dreams.
Next week on Context, one of the countries on Trump's travel ban, Sudan, is once again in the midst of a civil war. We speak with a refugee who now helps other refugees settle in Canada, and the fleeing of more than 1 million people, as war once again rages there.
Jerry Organ played for 12 seasons with the Ottawa Rough Riders and in 3 Grey Cup games, winning 2 championships. But his work in the spiritual life of players saw him face to face with a crisis in sport care. Jerry, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Lorna. Great to be reconnected with you.
Okay, so Jerry, talk to us about your teammate, Rod Woodward. What did you see in a need for care with Rod?
Wow. Well, his nickname was always Woody, so let's talk about Woody very affectionately. Woody came from Montreal to play with the Ottawa Rough Riders. Very passionate, aggressive, fun-loving football player. Just loved the sport, lived for it. Just a fabulous guy to have in the locker room, and a very intense individual. Well, as God would have it, between Wayne Tosh and I, we witnessed to Rod and to his wife. And very early in our careers together, Rod made a confession of faith, a profession of faith, and basically said, if I become a Christian, I will never tell anybody about it, and I won't stop drinking beer. Um, so he, he became quite the evangelist after that, and he chose, not everybody does, he chose to stop drinking beer as well. But a great story, and we played together for a few years, and then he moved on to other teams and settled in BC, working for the Investors Financial Group.
Tell us why there needs to be spiritual care in that rough and tumble world of sports.
Wow, yeah, who doesn't need spiritual care? But athletes are a strange breed. It appears that they're full of ego and confidence, but that's often just a front. And certainly, as we've been talking about Rod Woodward, over the years after his playing career, it became evident that Rod was acting strangely and had some very difficult things going on in his life. And we recognized that there was some real serious brain-related injuries affecting Rod's capacity in his business, in his family life, in his home. And yeah, prayer was absolutely critical in Rod's life. And so we supported him throughout the last several years of his life. And then eventually it was too hard to handle, and Kay had to have him admitted into long-term care in a lockup facility. But even there, God was gracious. So our prayers were answered in that Rod lost a lot of his capacity, but he never lost his faith. He never lost his capacity to tell people that God loved them and had a plan for their lives. He was vibrant and alive. He ran with endurance. The race was set before him, and he finished strong. He finished well, and but he finished too soon. He was 71 when he had a fall and died rather suddenly. But it was definitely the head injuries that ultimately affected the last part of his life and caused many of us to rise up and pray for Rod and be his very, very closest friend right to the end.
Are you encouraged at the progress we've made on being more careful about the concussion science that we have and how we use that for pro sports?
I think the jury is out. I think we've introduced a lot of protocols and safeguards. We're changing the rules. We're changing equipment. But I still think there's some way for us to go to really wrestle this thing to the ground to the point where more athletes can be safer while playing rather explosive sports like rugby, and football, of course. So I'm not sure that we've really found the answer yet. I think we're still ducking and diving. I think we've got to trust a little bit more of the research and the science and the experts, and then be brave enough to change the game or the games if we need to do so for the sake of the athletes.
The CFL lawsuit should do something about that conversation, do you think?
Yeah, we can talk about it, and thank God you and I have the freedom in Canada to talk about anything, including this. But once you're involved in lawsuits, class action lawsuits, and things like that, then the key people that should be speaking are they're kind of silenced, and that's the awkward part about it. So we need to speak so that things can happen. And more boys can continue to play football and girls play rugby or whatever they want to do, but they have to be able to do it safely within the rules and with better equipment, better safeguards, and the protocols can't be just a word. It has to be significant intervention when there's been a head injury.
Okay. One of the things I want to touch on now is your life as a chaplain. People engage their faith in whatever profession looking for God's wisdom. Does that work in sport as well?
Oh, it sure does. It sure does. People are created in the image of God, and they're thirsty for truth, righteousness, and hope. And these days, hope is the key word. So for those of us that are blessed to have God in us and with us, I'm just finding people are so thirsty, whether I sit with somebody on a plane or sit with 4 or 5 young guys from gangs, sitting down with them and talking about the truth of God and the hope we have in Christ. Everybody is is really reaching out for hope in some way, and Christ we know to be the answer. So we have a captive audience. We just need to be bold, brave, walk in humility, and just share the love of Jesus. I just shared with someone the other day, a businessman who didn't ever realize he could have a personal relationship and a walk with Jesus Christ.
All right, Jerry, keep preaching it. Thank you, Jerry. That was Grey Cup champion Jerry Organ speaking to us from Ottawa, town of his hometown, Ottawa Roughriders. Okay, well, back to you, Sheldon.
Thank you, Lorna. It's something no parent wants to imagine. Attending your son or daughter's hockey game and suddenly the unthinkable happens. You witness your child suffer an injury that will change their life forever. Well, that reality played out for Dan Coldwell. Take a look at this.
It was really difficult. It's one of the most difficult things to watch, is to see your daughter get injured on the ice, but then the recovery period, and just wondering how long it's going to take. And when you have symptoms for a year and a half, symptoms like memory loss, those are really difficult to take. It's very worrisome, and what's the rest of her life going to look like? And fortunately, she was able to recover fully.
From a parental perspective, those who might be watching, thinking about putting their daughter in sport, their son in sport, what would you say to them?
I think that hockey is a fantastic sport. All three of my girls played. It builds character. I don't think that hockey is the problem. I think that the head injuries can happen in gymnastics, skiing, all types of different sports. I would say that if an injury does occur, make sure that you take your time in recovering and recover properly, so that you're not susceptible to them in the future.
Scriptures teach that we ought to take care of our bodies as temples and honor them. If I'm in a sport where there is risk, does that mean I'm not really taking care of my body? Where's the faith and practical balance in that?
I think it starts with the leaders and in sport, and the coaches and the officials, and especially in the hockey environment, and they have to take responsibility for the safety and for the bodies of all participants, not just their own players, but those of their opponents, and that'll go a long way to respecting people's bodies.
Okay, so Sheldon, we're learning.
That's right.
This is a stewardship issue.
Very much so.
You spoke with someone who had 2 concussions.
That's right. I spoke actually with Dan Caldwell's daughter, Danielle. She suffered a very gruesome attack on the ice. We'll hear a lot more about it, and I want you to take a look at that. It's quite riveting.
Okay, so in my last year of playing, I got 2, and they were pretty close together. The first one I don't really remember. I just remember waking up on the ice. But the second one was unfortunate. I was kind of attacked by a goalie. Yeah, she kind of got me right in the back of the head, so I kind of swung forward and then went backwards.
What was your recovery like, and how long did it take you to get back on your feet?
I was in my grade 12 year, so I missed a lot of the last end of grade 12. I spent a lot of time in dark rooms. The cognitive rest was really important, so I did a lot of coloring books and just keeping it really low, like no TV, no cell phone, no computer. Lots of cognitive rest.
What is your involvement with sport looking like now?
I was training a couple years ago. I did some training with a team in Aurora. I also have my coaching certificate, but I don't do a lot with that. I'm in school, so I'm pretty busy, and I work my part-time job as well.
Concussions in female hockey are higher than some stats show, even higher than male NFL football players. My question to you is, what do you think is happening on the ice? What's happening in the game of female hockey, female sport, that isn't happening elsewhere?
I think that maybe it's neck strength in women. Maybe it's not as strong as male, and they don't have as much neck strength when they're hit to perhaps not have their head hit the ice rather than have it hit the ice. I think it's a really great game, and it builds lots of character, but I think that we need to have respect, and we need to play the game within the rules and be able to respect our opponents as well.
Next week on Context, one of the countries on Trump's travel ban, Sudan, is once again in the midst of a civil war. We speak with a refugee who now helps other refugees settle in Canada, and the fleeing of more than 1 million people as war once again rages there.
Okay, well, Sheldon Neal, in Boston, your panel found out some pretty incredible facts about concussions, especially at the community sport level. And we don't have to just be helpless about this, right? There's an organization, Tim Fleiser's Sport Concussion Legacy, rolls together with you as a parent and as people who want to play the game. What did you learn?
Well, they actually taught me firsthand, Lorna, the proper way to hit, that there is a right way and there is a wrong way, quite simply put. And we just want to take a note that more of this really discussion, we got deeper into the research, is going to be available on the website tomorrow. We're going to profile that. So if you love what you see, continue on that website tomorrow and you'll see it all there. But for now, let's take a look at this. All right, Jeff, you're going to show me the right and wrong way to tackle. And if you do anything wrong, I got my man Tim here watching. So, all right, so let's start with what is the wrong way? Take us through that.
Wrong way, basically, head down. Either you're up way too high or you're diving towards someone's feet. But
so what does that look like if you're on the field?
Coming in at you, if I got my eyes to the ground here, my neck is in a compromised position.
Okay.
So it's not safe. So I'm going head in, and my head would be like hitting right in between the numbers in your chest.
Okay.
Something like that. You just see the neck scrunching. Just totally not good. Not what we want.
No, what does a right tackle look like?
Right tackle, you get nice and low. You bend at the knees and the hips. Keeps your chest up, so your head's up and aware, which just is a better athletic stance.
Okay.
And you'll be stepping into the tackle. So if I'm stepping into you here,
okay,
my hips are low. I come in through with the arms. I drive through the hips, and I would drive back.
Okay. So you're moving the head from between the numbers to either side of the shoulders, that seems.
Correct.
How easy is that? If you want to chime in, I'm almost out of time, but how easy is that to make those adjustments on the field when there's the ball I'm going, like, to remember these adjustments when the adrenaline's running in the game?
Well, one of the things I think that's remarkable about sports and what you've seen over time is games have constantly evolved, right? I mean, look at the evolution of the forward pass, for example. So what's important or what you really notice is that young athletes, when they're instructed, they will adapt. So kids that we've taught to tackle this way, you're going to see that progressing forward.
Well, watching the Super Bowl this past weekend could not have been easy for our next guest. In 2015, Canadian Tyler Varga was picked up as a free agent by the Indianapolis Colts. He clawed his way up from 7th to 2nd string to get time on the field. But in week 3 of his NFL career, Varga took a hard hit on the head on a kickoff return, and he suffered a serious concussion. Though he tried to return to the field last year, he finally decided to throw in the towel. Tyler Varga joins us from Calgary today. How bad were the symptoms that you had that decided this is time I've got to leave the game that you love?
They weren't good. I think the most concerning part was just the duration that I experienced those symptoms for. So that definitely had some weighting in my decision to step away from the game.
I understand you did like a risk-benefit analysis to call it quits. What did you weigh out?
I guess you could call it that. I mean, it's like any decision in life, right? You have to weigh the pros, you have to weigh the cons. You got to weigh them against each other and make a decision based off of that. So for me, honestly, the decision came down to, it wasn't purely about the concussion. There was other factors that came into play as well. Obviously, there's other injury risk involved with football, and you have to think to yourself, okay, well, at least for myself, I want to achieve a certain quality of life, certain sustainable quality of life, in years to come, and what's my best option or best path to achieving that? And so that, other injuries come into play. Like I've never had major knee reconstruction. I've never had a major shoulder surgery. My neck's intact. Everything's intact. So those things, those things obviously weigh into it too. And, of course, concussions and injury, and it's a buzzword now that surrounds the game. So yeah, that took that was part of the decision as well. But,
okay,
maintaining sort of what I have, I think, was a big part of it. And then, pursuit of other opportunities.
All right, and Tyler, you did get unusual opportunities. You got the National Football Foundation Scholarship Athlete Award, and only 16 people have received that honor in our country. And not everybody's got those kind of options. What about them that don't have options after those kind of litany of injuries you just discussed?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it's one of the things that we need to address when we're talking about injuries in football and the sport as a whole. It's how do we alleviate that? How do we prevent players from running into that a crossroads where really it's football or nothing? And I think that the solution really comes from a grassroots level and emphasizing education all throughout sort of a player or an athlete's career, whether it's football or any sport really. You can't have players given a pass in educational settings to play sport, right? There has to be an equal balance. So I was fortunate enough to have just as much of an emphasis on education. So I came out with a good degree and other opportunities. But other athletes may not have those opportunities because they didn't place as much of an emphasis or as high of an importance on getting the tools outside of the playing field to succeed in life.
You've been a good cautionary tale for us, and I admire that you took that difficult decision to know, what, there's more to life than playing in the NFL. Thank you very much. That was Tyler Varga, a Canadian football player who formerly played for the Indianapolis Colts. He left the game of football after a severe concussion.
Next week on Context, one of the countries on Trump's travel ban, Sudan, is once again in the midst of a civil war. We speak with a refugee who now helps other refugees settle in Canada, and the fleeing of more than 1 million people as war once again rages there.
Question for the week: why does a Christian care there could be head injuries in sport? Because the spiritual dimension is always at play in our lives. The physical body is a gift from God, and how we treat what God gives us is called stewardship. So when a sport has the potential to cause a brain injury, well, that's a stewardship issue. And the Bible says, don't live in fear, be a change agent. That would mean play sport in a way that respects the body and health of all the players. Science has taught us a lot more about concussions. Faith teaches us about wisdom. So, how you behave is a spiritual issue. There are many athletes who find that having a personal relationship with Jesus helps them think wisely. So when you see those shots of the pro athletes thanking God, pointing to heaven, bowing a knee in prayer, it's a high-profile trigger that the athlete finds Jesus to be a source for power and self-control. It's a good reminder that even sports is an opportunity to use God's wisdom. There's a lot more on our guests and the issues surrounding concussions on our website and Facebook, as well as information on the Concussion Legacy Foundation. For all of us at Context, thanks for watching. It takes a village, and we'll see you next week.